The topic that I will talk with you today, inshallah ta'ala, is وَأَقِيمُ الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ, and to establish the scales with justice, and to do the scales justice as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to do. Brothers and sisters, لَا يَخْفَى عَلَى أَحَدٍ مِنْكُمْ. We're living in a very, very mysterious time, in the sense that what was right yesterday is wrong today. What was wrong yesterday is correct today. What was moral last week is immoral today. What was evil yesterday is now correct today. So things are literally being flipped upside down in front of our very own eyes, and it's happening at such a rapid pace that sometimes we don't even realize it is happening. And this reminds me of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, الذي خرجه الإمام أحمد وكلكم يحفظ هذا الحديث. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, سيأتي على الناس سنون خداعات يصدق فيها الكاذب ويكذب فيها الصادق ويؤمن فيها الخائن ويخون فيها الأمين إلى آخر الحديث. The Prophet ﷺ says there will be treacherous years to come later on, where the truth, the honest person will be deemed the liar, and the liar will be deemed the truthful, and the faithful will be deemed the treacherous one, and the treacherous one will be viewed as the faithful one. And brothers and sisters, I think this describes our situation today amongst ourselves, unfortunately, as Muslims. And some of you might be asking what I mean. I cannot think of something that is more difficult to do in the Muslim community, like being online or telling your fellow Muslim or Muslima, Ya Abdullah, ittaqillah, hadha muharram. I cannot think of something that is more difficult to do with another fellow Muslim than just to tell them, brother, I love you for the sake of Allah, but what you're doing is not acceptable. It is forbidden in Islam. It is haram. It is like climbing a mountain. Just to say something is haram today, it's like climbing a mountain. Unfortunately, your fellow Muslims will describe you as being judgmental, right? You think you got it all figured out. You think you're better than me. And of course, the Muslim convenience cards, they start flowing in one by one. There's so much so that it's like an instantaneous reply. When you send someone an email, you get that reply that says, thank you for contacting us, no one is in. You know immediately that that's an instantaneous reply. No one wrote that up. We've become somewhat like this as Muslims. We have literally turned al-amiruna bil-ma'ruf wa-nahuna 'anil munkar into these monsters, judgmental freaks, out there with their binoculars looking for the faults of other Muslims, simply for pointing out the obvious. Brother, this is haram. Brother, this is not acceptable. And I believe that it is high time that we as a Muslim ummah flip the tables, change the narrative, and start a new page with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For 14, 15 centuries, enjoining good and forbidding evil in Islam was always considered a noble act. It's not until today that suddenly the one who is doing this noble act is viewed as a judgmental monster condemning everybody to hell. And that's why when you do this, you're immediately met with a barrage of Muslim convenience cards. One will tell you, you don't know what's in my heart. The other tells you, who are you to judge? The other says, only God can judge me. The other says, sinners blaming sinners for sinning different. The other tells you, well, your sin is better because it's in private and my sin is in public. The other one, and of course there's more to add to the list, oh, you're not on my journey, so you don't have the right to tell me what to do. And the other, it comes along and says, you don't have the right to tell me what's halal and haram because you do not share in my experiences because we're the opposite gender. And by the way, what these slogans all have in common is that not one of them is found in the Quran, nor is it found in the prophetic tradition of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we use them, and it gains traction, and it becomes the public reply. Anytime someone comes at me with constructive criticism, I immediately rebut them and silence them. By the way, for whatever it's worth, you will never meet a person in life who will come to you and introduce themselves to you and say, Akhi, my name is Fulan ibn Fulan. I want to tell you something about myself. I despise the truth. You will never meet someone like that. However, we will always masquerade it with a lot of these Muslim convenience cards. No one will say that to you. Which leads me to my first point, brothers and sisters, and that is that when we're talking about advice, we have to realize that it is a transaction no different than every other transaction that is out there. what we've been doing for decades, unfortunately, is we've been zoomed in so much, we've been so fixated on one party, the person giving the advice, that we don't realize there's another person in the picture. I believe it is high time for us now to zoom out. Because again, the transaction that we're talking about, there's a person giving the advice and there's the person receiving the advice. For far too long, we've been fixated and zoomed in on the person giving the advice, depicting them as these monsters, right? Committing some sort of evil. So as the transaction I'm talking about, brothers and sisters, things work in pairs, right? Like a buying and selling transaction. You have a buyer and then you have a seller, right? What has to happen? Both of them have to work together so the product is sold. You give me the product, I give you the money. When it comes to a lock and a key, you don't just take any key and put it in the door in the hopes of it opening. You have to have the right key and also the right lock. Both of them have to work in unison together for you to open that door. And you can use this, if you so wish, metaphorically in terms of opening someone's heart. There has to be iqbal. We have to do something on our part. Example number 3, there's a shipping and there's a receiving department. You can only have your items dropped in the receiving department if the receiving department is willing to open the doors for you. And example number 4 has to do with a charger and device, right? A charger and device example. When you don't get a charge, there are 2 possible issues at play here. It could either mean that your charger is defective, but it can also mean that the device is defective. But what we've been doing, unfortunately, unknowingly I will say, is that every time we don't get a charge, we take the charger, we throw it in the garbage, and we bring another charger. We don't see a charge, we take the charger again, we throw it in the garbage, and we buy another charger. Meaning that we're always blaming the shortcomings on the people who are advising us. They didn't do it the right way. They didn't say it nice enough. They weren't considerate. And by the way, that could possibly be the case, but I think it's becoming trendy to use this as an excuse, and this is the biggest problem. So when you have a charger and you have a device, we have to ask ourselves, you know what? Maybe we're not getting a charge because the problem is not really with the charger. Is it just very well possible that the problem is with the device itself? It's high time that we start exploring that option as a Muslim community. It could be the charger, but guess what? It can also be the device. Okay? Point number 2 leads me to the active ingredients in those who are given nasiha. I agree, without a shadow of a doubt, when you're given admonition, when you're given advice to someone, and by the way, this lecture is not about how to give advice. It's just to point out certain things that I think we have to start exploring and start a new chapter with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we're talking about active ingredients, there are usually 2 that must be found in the giver, the advisor. So you give an advice to someone, you usually have to be knowledgeable on the subject that you're advising about. Not because you have an expertise in a certain field, that does not necessarily give you the green light to talk about that which you have no knowledge of. So you have to be very aware and knowledgeable of the subject that you're advising the person about. Number 2, and this is we have to explain a little bit concerning point number 2. You have to do it with wisdom. Now for the average Muslim, if you ask them, brother, what is your definition? What's your understanding of wisdom? ما تعرف الحكمة لك. An average Muslim will say, being nice and being gentle. I'm sorry, that is not the definition of wisdom. Wisdom is knowing when to be firm, knowing when to be passive, knowing when to be aggressive, knowing when to turn a blind eye, knowing when to smile. What works with this person is not going to work with that person. I cannot speak to them the same. Do you know why? Because I know this person is rough around the edges and this person is extremely soft. I cannot. Hikmah dictates that I address and deal with them different. That's what hikmah is. Hikmah is not being nice and having a smile all the time. Because there's not a day that goes by online only that there's a Muslim preaching on how to use wisdom, brother. Right? And what works for someone might not work for the next person. Another thing to point out when we speak of wisdom, brothers and sisters, wisdom is not a constant. It is a variable. Meaning that it changes with time, place, culture, climate, knowledge, and so on and so forth. So wisdom is not just one rule that you use for everybody and anybody. Okay? So let's assume that we talked about the person giving the advice. Now what about the person on the receiving end? Do they have any role to play, or is it always the responsibility for the person given advice to do miracles and to perform these crazy things just so that person that they're giving advice to can change? La, they have a huge responsibility to bear. But for years on end, we've completely missed that they're even part of the equation. And this in itself, I believe, firmly believe, that this is not helping the very people that we're trying to help. Again, this is not helping the people that we're trying to help by completely Xing them out of the equation, although acknowledging and realizing that they are part of the equation, right? So what the receiving end, what do we have to have? We also have to have some ingredients active in play as well. They have to be in motion as well, right? One is to have humility. One is to have humility. It's to know and understand, irrespective of where we graduated, where we work, how much money we make, I don't know it all, and there's nothing exceptional or special about me that another average Muslim cannot come and pull me to the side and say, brother, this is haram, هذا عيب, this is munkar, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that becomes problematic, because when you move from humility, now it could be a problem if we don't have when we're talking about someone's ego, it has to be a penetratable ego. Now I'm specific and selective with my words here. I'm not saying not to have an ego, because that would render you not a human being anymore. We all have egos, but we have to make sure that our egos are tamed and they're penetratable. We don't want to be like that balloon that's so full of itself that anything touches it, it completely bursts. This is how, unfortunately, this is the road that we're driving in. Now let us also consider that the Prophet ﷺ, when the companions asked them about the definition of arrogance, they said, Ya Rasulullah, we want to have nice clothes, we want to have nice shoes, right? Is this arrogance? He says, La. Al-kibru batarul haq wa ghamtun nas. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, no, not at all. Arrogance is when you reject the truth. You reject the truth and you despise people. Because someone is younger than you, you turn them away. Because someone is in a lesser social status, you don't take the truth from them because of their social status, right? This becomes a huge problem when we don't have active ingredients within us. Is it possible that I'm arrogant? Is it possible that I'm the issue here? So it really becomes an issue of, it really doesn't matter who gives me nasiha anymore. Even if 30 people stood in line to give me advice, it doesn't matter anymore. Do you know why? Because I have an ego problem. I think there's something innately special and unique about me that no one can tell me about myself. أعوذ بالله أن نكون من هؤلاء. اللهم آمين. This leads me to point number 3. Brothers and sisters, when we talk about flu shots, and by the way, for whatever it's worth, if you took the flu shot or not, it's not a matter of mas'alat wala and bara. You're still my brother, you're still my sister. But what happens when you go to the doctor to receive a flu shot? Do you just go in there with your 4 or 5 layers with your coat and you say, I'm not doing anything on my part, give me the flu shot? Are there things that we have to do in advance for that flu shot to be effective so it hits the spot? Or do we just go in like this and say, yeah, I'm unique. There's something special about me. I'm not doing nothing on my part. Give me the shot like this. Do we do that? Not at all. What do? We take off the coat, we take off the t-shirt, the layers, the long johns when it's a really cold day. We take off everything. And then the doctor administers and gives us the jab. So you see here, the doctor does something and we also do something on our part. Okay? So it takes 2 people to work together. The problem that I see happening in a society that's breeding and prides itself on individualism, myself, my phone, my career, my job, my gadget, my personalized space, my. Sometimes we don't realize that we ourselves have so many layers that the only way moving forward is for us to start taking off these layers, especially with a lot of these self-help books. And let me also remind, the years on end watching Netflix, the years on end watching HBO, the years on end watching the American Idol. You cannot tell me, my brother and sister, that we watch these shows for a decade or 2 and that is not going to shape the way we see the world and by extension the way we see Islam. When you're listening, your ears, when that content is going in your ears, and where does it settle? It settles in the heart, in this vessel. or when you're watching and your eyes are taking in everything, right? Both of these pathways lead right to the heart. So it's only expected and natural to come to the masjid and find your imam or khatib perhaps judgmental, to find him a turnoff, to find him aggressive. Do you know why? That years on end of television, it doesn't just go haba'an manthura. It doesn't go alone. The point that I want to call all of us to is for us to start looking at ourselves in the mirror. And instead of constantly playing the victim, is for us to say, you know what? Maybe I'm the problem after all. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Patting people on the back constantly ruins them. Patting people on the back constantly ruins them. The same way, constant criticism also ruins them. And this is why Allah tells us, وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ. Forgive me. وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ is to establish the balance with justice. There has to be equilibrium. There has to be a balance between both sides. Which leads me to point number 4. If we're being objective, the person who came and told you about, maybe gave you advice about why you're not praying, or maybe that you're in a haram relationship, or maybe you're not wearing hijab as an example. When a person comes to us and gives us advice, let's assume that they went about it the wrong way. Let's assume they weren't wise, they weren't kind, they were very foolish, and they have a lot to learn, right? I'll give you that. Do they exist in our ummah? They do exist. Let's just also say they exist in abundance, just so we're somewhat charitable. But if you look at the person giving you the advice, do you know what that's called in the sight of Allah? لا يعدو أن يكون هذا عند الله خطأ. This in the sight of Allah is but a mistake. It's not even a sin, it's a mistake. Khata. Not praying is not a mistake. Not praying 5 times a day on time is an egregious sin in the sight of Allah. Not wearing hijab is a sin in the sight of Allah. Committing zina is a sin in the sight of Allah. Not lowering your gaze watching TV all the time with random things walking in front of you, that is an egregious sin in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Gambling is an egregious sin in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Doing all these things are egregious in the sight of Allah. So let us be objective here. It's not about how you feel. It's not about how I feel. That becomes irrelevant when we're exposed to the truth. So this is a mistake. This is an egregious sin. Do you know what's happening? Do you guys know what's happening? Shaitan has been playing us for fools for so long. Do you know what Shaitan is doing? He has us dwelling so much on the people that are giving us advice that we have completely forgotten the severity of the sins that we are perpetuating. I want to repeat that one more time. See, the sheikh who's telling you what you're doing is haram, the brother who's giving you advice on salat, the sister who's giving another sister on how to wear the proper hijab, they are not your enemies. They are not your enemies. They do not think they're better than you. But I want to rewind one more time. Shaitan wants us to focus and dwell so much on how that person gave us a mistake, so much so that yunsik fil kaba'ir allati tartakibuha yawman ba'da yawm. He wants us to focus so much and dwell on, oh my God, did you see how they spoke to me? That's not how you do it. And we go online and we want to talk to the board of the masjid and we write a tweet, all because people don't know. I mean, we make a big fuss about it. But in the sight of Allah, do you know what's more egregious? Not praying the 5 times a day. Not the mistake that this person made. So Shaitan has us dwelling on this while we completely dread and we become forgetful of the sins that we are constantly perpetuating and carrying. Okay? What does this mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when Shaitan did not want to prostrate to Adam and Allah held him accountable, what did he say? قَالَ رَبِّي بِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي لَأُزَيِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَأُغْوِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ إِلَّا عِبَادَكَ مِنْهُمُ الْمُخْلَصِينَ جَعَلَنِ اللَّهُ وَإِيَّاكُمْ مِنْ أُولَٰئِكَ الْمُخْلَصِينَ اللهم آمين. Shaitan, instead of standing up and asking pardon and repenting for his sins, the first thing he does is he plays the false victim. You know, I'm perfect, there's nothing wrong with me. This is what Shaitan does. And that's why in this world you have people who are aggressors and agitators, but they will play a good comedy and depict themselves as the victims. Shaitan is one of those people, or one of those individuals. Instead of him standing up, he blames first Allah. He says, oh my Lord, because you misguided me, I will beautify for them in the land, and I will misguide all of them, only those whom you have preferred. This is what Shaitan does. And Shaitan, his job is to literally magnify that which is insignificant in the sight of Allah. Do you know that mistake we're talking about? He takes it and you're losing your time and energy over that. They spoke to me that way, that wasn't kind. Shaitan magnifies, right, that which is insignificant in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he undermines and he downplays that which is significant in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you know what our job is as Muslims? Do you know what our job is as servants of Allah? Is to know when we're being played and when we're not being played. The worst thing is when we Muslims become a people where we start to embrace our enemy and we have hate for those who really have a genuine concern about our well-being. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب الأولين والآخرين وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين. Last example I would like to give, brothers and sisters, just so we can get a better idea of how tricky and savvy and conniving shaitan can be. Have you ever noticed that when someone gives you religious advice, it's like climbing a mountain? You know what? خلينا بالله عليك خلينا منه هذا. Oh, we don't want to talk to him. That's going to be a bulbs. That's going to become a big problem. It's going to become an issue. I gave him advice 2 years ago and he didn't want to talk to me ever again because I told him what he was doing was haram. It wasn't. Today, just to say that something is haram, it's like climbing a steep mountain and people are on the top throwing rocks at you. Okay? So the most difficult thing today is just to give advice to your fellow Muslim brother or sister. But have we noticed that when it comes to worldly advice, our ears perk up, we're willing to listen, we embrace the people who are giving us advice? So for example, right, especially for the younger generation, right, when someone comes to you and they have a successful YouTube channel and they've been running it for years, and they see what you're doing, and they immediately, as soon as they see your account and the way you're doing it, they immediately call you out and say, bro, this is not how, bro, this is wrong. And they might even call you names, right? But guess what? We take it, we embrace it, we welcome it, we're okay with it. Really? Okay, well, show me how it's done. We don't get offended, right? When it's the last time someone showed you how to run a YouTube channel and your first reaction is, oh, who are you to judge? I'll answer for you, never. You guys know why that is? Because shaitan, again and again, doesn't want you to focus on the deen. That's why you find this hostility when we're talking about religion and halal and haram. There's this hostility, there's this resentment, there's this force that's saying, stay away, stay away. It's very, very difficult. But when it comes for the worldly affairs, you've been running a business for, let's say, a decade. Someone has been running the same business, they're in the same field, and they've been doing it perhaps for 2 decades. As soon as they walk into your office, they can immediately point out what's wrong. And they tell you, Akhi, look, I'll be very honest with you. Even for him to say it is very comfortable. He doesn't feel like he has to prepare a script ahead of time. But how do I tell him how to run a business? No, maybe I shouldn't. No, we feel free to do this. Akhi, this is not how you run a business. Here, let me show you. We might not even know the person. And we greet them, Jazakallah khair, thank you for showing me. Wallahi, I wish you would have come to me earlier. You guys see? When it's for religious purposes, shaitan does not want us to become better religious people. He wants to drag to hell with him as many people as he can. So next time when we get this uppity feeling and we feel this resentment, we feel this force, we have to put our egos in check and remind ourselves that, you know what? This is shaitan at play. And you end up playing him. You don't allow him to play you. Right?